forced into a marriage that threatened to extinguish her artistic spirit. Alara never imagined her wedding day would instead ignite a journey of self-discovery. The morning light filtered through the latticed windows of her modest bedchamber, casting delicate shadows across the worn wooden floor. Alara Whitmore sat cross-legged on her narrow bed, a piece of charcoal dancing between her fingers as she captured the gnarled oak outside her window. Each stroke was deliberate, passionate, a small rebellion against the suffocating predictability of her daily existence. Thank you so for sticking around with me. I truly appreciate your love and support. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. At 19, her heart was a canvas yearning for bold strokes. She dreamed of the bustling ateliers of Paris, where artists gathered to debate technique and philosophy over wine and paint-stained palettes. In her mind's eye, she traced the ancient ruins of Rome, her sketchbook a faithful companion as she documented the interplay of light and shadow on weathered stone. These dreams were her sanctuary, a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of travel, artistry, and the intoxicating freedom of creation. But such aspirations were luxuries her family could ill afford. The Whitmores were respectable. Her father a minor gentleman with a small estate, her mother from a once proud family whose fortunes had dwindled with each passing generation. They maintained appearances with threadbare elegance, their drawing room furnished with pieces that spoke of better days, their meals simple but served on china that had belonged to her grandmother. Alara found solace in her art amidst this genteel poverty. Her current sketch, the oak tree reaching toward an endless sky, embodied everything she longed for: growth, freedom, the courage to stretch beyond one's circumstances. She added another delicate line to represent a bird taking flight, a symbol of the dreams that lived so vividly in her heart. The announcement came on a Tuesday, delivered with the weight of finality that only desperate circumstances could produce. Alara's father entered the drawing room with a grim set to his jaw, while her mother followed, a handkerchief pressed firmly to her lips as if to contain words she couldn't bear to speak. "Alara, my dear," her father began, his voice stripped of its usual booming cheer, "we have secured an advantageous match for you." The charcoal slipped from her fingers, leaving a dark smudge on her pale morning dress. A cold dread coiled in her stomach like a serpent. Advantageous matches, she knew from whispered conversations and cautionary tales, rarely concerned themselves with the bride's happiness. "Who is it, Papa?" she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Duke Alaric of Blackwood," he stated, as if presenting a rare and precious jewel. "He is of a certain age, but his lands are vast and his coffers deep. This marriage will save us, Alara. It will restore our family's good name and secure our future. Duke Alaric." The name alone conjured images of crumbling stone walls and portraits darkened with age. He was known throughout the county as the Old Duke, a recluse whose reputation preceded him like a winter fog. Whispers painted him as stern and humorless, a man burdened by an unspoken sorrow who had lost his first wife decades ago and had since lived in solitary grandeur at Blackwood Manor. For Alara, it felt like a death sentence to her vibrant aspirations. Her dreams of exploring the world, of painting landscapes that sang with colour, of finding a love that mirrored the passion she poured into her art, all of it would vanish, replaced by the sombre duties of a duchess in what she imagined to be a desolate estate. "But Papa, my art, my desire to see the world," she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. Her mother finally lowered the handkerchief, revealing eyes red-rimmed with unshed tears. When she spoke, it was with a weary resignation that cut deeper than any anger could have. "Child, those are fanciful notions. A duchess has duties. A duke's wife provides an heir, manages a household, and upholds her husband's name. Your art can be a private hobby, nothing more." The words fell like stones into still water, each one sending ripples of despair through Alara's heart. Her spirit withered under their weight, and she spent the following weeks in a haze of preparation for a future she felt was already dead. The few formal visits from Duke Alaric were brief, stiff affairs that only confirmed her worst fears. He was indeed older, perhaps in his early 40s, his hair silvered at the temples, his face etched with lines that spoke of a life lived, perhaps, but not necessarily enjoyed. His eyes, a startling shade of grey, held a distant, almost melancholic quality that revealed nothing of his thoughts or feelings. He spoke little during these visits, observing her with an unnerving intensity that made her feel like a specimen under examination. When he did address her, it was with polite formality that suggested duty rather than interest. Each encounter solidified her growing fear. This was a man who would never understand her, never share her passions, never see beyond the obligation she represented. Have you ever felt truly seen and understood by someone, or feared that you never would be? What would that mean to you? The wedding day arrived shrouded in a persistent drizzle that seemed to mirror Alara's internal weather. She moved through the preparations like a ghost haunting her own life, her silk gown feeling less like a bridal dress and more like a shroud. The ivory fabric, exquisite though it was, felt foreign against her skin, a costume for a role she had never auditioned for. As she walked down the aisle of the grand chapel, her hand resting lightly on her father's arm, she felt the weight of expectation from every guest in attendance. The ancient stones seemed to whisper of centuries of marriages, some joyful, others dutiful, all binding in their finality. Her gaze met Duke Alaric's at the altar, and she found his expression as unreadable as ever, a solemn mask that offered no comfort, no hint of warmth or anticipation. The vows were spoken in voices that carried across the hushed chapel, the rings exchanged with hands that barely trembled. And then it was done. Alara, now Duchess of Blackwood, felt a profound emptiness settle within her chest. She was wedded, but her soul felt divorced from her body. The wedding breakfast was a blur of polite congratulations and forced smiles. Alara sat beside her new husband, acutely aware of his silent presence amidst the polite chatter of their guests. She nodded at appropriate intervals, smiled when expected, and longed for nothing more than the solitude of her new chambers, where she could be alone with her grief. Then came the moment for the wedding gifts. A parade of well-wishers approached their table, presenting jewels that caught the light, silks that whispered of distant lands, and various domestic treasures that spoke to her new role as mistress of a great estate. Alara nodded politely at each offering, her mind elsewhere, her heart heavy with the weight of her new reality. Finally, Duke Alaric rose from his chair, and the room quieted in respectful attention. He approached her with measured steps, carrying in his hands a small, intricately carved wooden box. Alara's heart gave a weary flutter. Another piece of jewellery, no doubt, something to adorn her person and display his wealth and status. But when he opened the box, her breath caught in her throat. Inside, nestled against dark velvet, lay not a necklace or a tiara, but a single, ornate brass key. Beside it rested a rolled parchment, tied with a simple ribbon that seemed to promise secrets waiting to be unveiled. He handed them to her, his grey eyes finally meeting hers directly, and for the first time since their acquaintance began, she detected a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps a hint of apprehension, or a quiet, cautious hope. "This key," he began, his voice a low rumble that carried across the hushed room, "is to a small cottage on the western edge of the estate. It is secluded, with a large sunlit room that I believe would make an excellent studio." Alara gasped, a small, involuntary sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Her art? He knew about her art? He continued, his gaze steady and unexpectedly gentle. "And this parchment contains a deed for the cottage and for a trust that will provide for all your needs, including the finest art supplies and any instruction you desire." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of sincerity that took her breath away. "It also contains a detailed itinerary for a grand tour. Paris, Florence, Rome, Vienna, all the cities you once spoke of with such longing. You will have a suitable chaperone, of course, and every expense will be covered. You may depart whenever you feel ready." The room fell silent, save for the soft rustle of silk as Alara trembled. She looked from the key to the parchment, then back to the Duke, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. The stern, old man who was supposed to be her jailer, her dream killer, had just handed her the very keys to her freedom, to the realization of her deepest desires. Tears welled in her eyes, Not of sorrow this time, but of an overwhelming, dizzying joy that threatened to lift her from her chair. "But why?" she managed to whisper, her voice thick with emotion. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, softening the harsh lines of his face and revealing, for just a moment, the man beneath the reputation. "I observed you, Alara. I heard the passion in your voice when you spoke of art during our visits, saw the light in your eyes when you described distant lands. I may be old, and perhaps a recluse, but I am not blind." He paused, his expression growing more earnest. "A marriage, I believe, can be built on more than just duty. It can be built on respect, on shared purpose, and on the freedom to pursue one's true self. I wish for you to be happy, Alara, truly happy." In that moment, surrounded by the knowing glances of their wedding guests, Alara stared at him with new eyes. Not an old duke, not a stern recluse, but a thoughtful, perceptive man who, despite his own sorrows, had somehow understood hers. He had not taken her dreams away, he had given them wings. Her wedding gift was not a mere trinket to be displayed, but the promise of a life she had thought lost forever. As she clutched the key and parchment to her chest, feeling their weight and possibility, Alara realized that her story with the Duke of Blackwood was not ending on this wedding day. It was just beginning, and it promised to be far more surprising and far more hopeful than any fairy tale she had ever dared to imagine. The carriage wheels crunched against the gravel drive as Blackwood Manor emerged from the morning mist like something from a Gothic novel. Alara pressed her face to the window, her breath fogging the glass as she took in the imposing structure that was now her home. The manor stretched before her in all its ancient grandeur, weathered stone walls that had witnessed centuries of history, tall windows that caught the early light, and ivy that crept up the walls like nature's own tapestry. It was a far cry from her family's modest estate, where she could walk from one end of the house to the other in mere moments. Here, the entrance hall alone seemed larger than her former drawing room, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadows and portraits of long-dead ancestors gazing down with stern expressions. "Welcome home, Your Grace," came a crisp voice from behind her. Alara turned to find a woman of perhaps 50 years, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her dark dress impeccable despite the early hour. There was something in her eyes, however, a warmth that belied her stern appearance. "I am Mrs. Hartwell, the housekeeper," the woman continued with a slight curtsy. "His Grace has instructed me to ensure your every comfort during your settling in." "Thank you," Alara managed, still overwhelmed by the sheer scale of her new surroundings. This is all quite magnificent." Mrs. Hartwell's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "It can be overwhelming at first, Your Grace. The manor has been in the Blackwood family for over 3 centuries, but I dare say it could use a lady's touch again." She paused, then added more quietly, "It has been far too long since these halls heard a woman's laughter." As Mrs. Hartwell led her through a maze of corridors, Alara caught glimpses of the Duke's domain. A library with shelves that stretched to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes, a conservatory where winter light filtered through glass panes onto exotic plants, drawing rooms furnished with pieces that spoke of both wealth and refined taste. Each room told a story of a life lived in solitude, beautiful but somehow incomplete. The cottage sat nestled in a grove of ancient oaks on the western edge of the estate, just as Duke Alaric had promised. It was smaller than the manor's smallest drawing room, but it possessed a charm that took Alara's breath away. Ivy climbed the stone walls, and a small garden, though overgrown, showed signs of having once been lovingly tended. But it was the sunlit room that truly captured her heart. The space was flooded with northern light from tall windows that faced away from the manor, offering privacy and the perfect illumination for artistic work. The walls were bare, waiting to be filled with her creations, and the wooden floors bore the gentle patina of age. Someone, Duke Alaric, she realized with a start, had already arranged for basic furniture, an easel of the finest quality, a table for her supplies, and shelves waiting to be filled. Her hands trembled as she unpacked her meager art supplies, a few pieces of charcoal, some basic paints, a handful of brushes worn smooth by use. They looked pitifully small in this grand space, like wildflowers in a cathedral. But then Mrs. Hartwell appeared at the door, followed by 2 footmen carrying crates that made Alara's heart race. "From His Grace," Mrs. Hartwell said simply, but there was a knowing smile in her eyes. Inside the crates lay treasures beyond Alara's wildest dreams, tubes of paint in colours she had only imagined, brushes of every size and texture, canvases stretched and primed to perfection, charcoals and pastels that felt like silk beneath her fingers. There were bottles of medium and varnish, palette knives that gleamed like silver, and papers so fine they seemed to whisper promises of the art they might become. Tears blurred her vision as she lifted each item with reverent hands. This was not just a collection of supplies, it was an investment in her dreams, a tangible declaration that someone believed in her potential. Her first attempts to create in this new environment were tentative, almost fearful. She found herself glancing toward the door, half expecting someone to burst in and declare it all a mistake. The charcoal felt foreign in her hands, and her usual confidence seemed to have abandoned her in the face of such overwhelming generosity. The sketch that emerged was a reflection of her internal state. A bird perched on a windowsill, one wing extended as if testing the air, uncertain whether to take flight or remain in the safety of its perch. There was melancholy in the lines, yes, but also something new, a tentative hope, like the first green shoots of spring pushing through winter soil. Life at Blackwood Manor settled into a rhythm over the following days. Dinner was served each evening in the formal dining room, where she and Duke Alaric sat at opposite ends of a table that could have seated 20. Their conversations were polite, careful. Discussions of the weather, the estate, her comfort in her new surroundings. But Alara found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, studying the man who had so unexpectedly changed her fate. She observed how he listened intently when the estate manager reported on the tenant's needs, his brow furrowed with genuine concern. She noticed how he always inquired after the health of the staff's families, how he remembered small details about their lives. In the library, she caught glimpses of him reading not just estate documents, but poetry, philosophy, treatises on art and architecture. This was not the stern, humorless recluse of reputation. This was a man of depth and intelligence, someone who carried himself with quiet dignity and treated those around him with respect, regardless of their station. One evening, as she made her way to the cottage for a late painting session, she found a book waiting on her easel, a volume on the techniques of the Renaissance masters, its pages filled with detailed illustrations and thoughtful commentary. There was no note, no explanation, but she knew it could only have come from one person. The gesture was small, perhaps, but it spoke volumes. Duke Alaric was paying attention, not just to her immediate needs, but to her growth as an artist. He was investing not just in her comfort, but in her dreams. As she flipped through the pages by candlelight, studying the techniques of masters long dead, Alara found herself wondering about the man who had placed this book in her hands. Who was Duke Alaric, truly? What had shaped him into someone capable of such unexpected empathy? She had begun to notice things. The way his eyes sometimes grew distant during their dinner conversations, as if he were seeing something far beyond the dining room walls. The careful way he spoke of the past, always in general terms, never revealing anything personal. The portrait gallery she had discovered, where one painting was conspicuously absent, leaving only a faded rectangle on the wallpaper to mark where it had once hung. Mrs. Hartwell had mentioned that it had been too long since the manor had heard a woman's laughter. What had happened to the woman who had laughed in these halls before? What sorrow had driven Duke Alaric into the solitude that had defined him for so long? Her growing realization was both humbling and intriguing. His wedding gift had not been a gesture of convenience or duty. It had been a profound act of empathy from someone who understood, perhaps better than most, what it meant to have one's dreams deferred or denied. As she closed the art book and prepared to return to the manor, Alara felt a new emotion stirring within her. Curiosity, not just about art or travel or the world beyond Blackwood's walls, but about the quiet, perceptive man who had seen her dreams and chosen to nurture them rather than extinguish them. Who was this Duke, who read poetry in solitude, and remembered the birthdays of his servants' children. What had made him into someone who could look at a young woman's despair and respond not with indifference, but with understanding? The answers, she suspected, would reveal as much about herself as they would about him. And for the first time since arriving at Blackwood Manor, Alara found herself genuinely eager to discover what tomorrow might bring. The morning of departure arrived with a crispness that seemed to mirror Alara's mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. Trunks lined the entrance hall of Blackwood Manor, filled with travelling clothes, art supplies, and the precious itinerary that had become her most treasured possession. She had read it so many times that she could recite each destination from memory. Paris, Florence, Rome, Vienna, cities that had lived only in her imagination, were about to become reality. Mrs. Hartwell bustled about, ensuring every detail was perfect, while the staff gathered to bid their new Duchess farewell. But it was Duke Alaric's presence in the entrance hall that surprised Alara most. She had expected a formal goodbye, perhaps a polite nod from the library window. Instead, he stood waiting by the carriage, his grey eyes holding an expression she was beginning to recognize. Quiet concern mixed with something that might have been pride. "The roads can be unpredictable this time of year," he said, his voice carrying a warmth she hadn't heard before. "Mrs. Pemberton will ensure your safety and comfort, but should you need anything at all, you have only to write." He handed her a small leather portfolio. "For your sketches," he explained simply, "I thought you might want to capture what you see along the way." Their eyes met for a moment longer than propriety strictly required, and Alara felt something shift between them, a recognition perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. "Thank you," she whispered, meaning far more than just the portfolio. "For everything." A slight smile touched his lips. "Travel well, Alara. See everything, experience everything, and come home with stories to tell." Home. The word lingered in her mind as the carriage pulled away, and she found herself looking back at the manor until it disappeared from view. Mrs. Pemberton proved to be a revelation, a widow of perhaps 45 years, with intelligent brown eyes and a ready laugh. She had travelled extensively with her late husband, a diplomat, and possessed both the practical knowledge to navigate foreign customs and the sensitivity to understand that this journey represented far more than mere sightseeing for her young charge. "The first time I saw Paris," Mrs. Pemberton confided as their ship approached Calais, "I wept, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of possibility. I suspect you may feel the same." She was right. Paris burst upon Alara's senses like a symphony in full crescendo. The bustling streets, the elegant architecture, the very air seemed to hum with creative energy. In the ateliers of Montmartre, she watched master artists at work, their hands moving with practiced confidence as they brought visions to life on canvas. She took lessons from a patient instructor named Monsieur Dubois, who taught her to see light not as illumination, but as a living thing that could be captured and shaped. Her first successful oil painting, a view of the Seine at sunset, brought tears to her eyes. The colours seemed to glow with their own inner fire, and for the first time she truly understood what it meant to translate emotion into art. From Paris, they travelled to Florence, where the Renaissance masters waited to share their secrets. Standing before Michelangelo's David, Alara felt the weight of artistic history pressing upon her shoulders, not as a burden, but as an inheritance. In the Uffizi, she spent hours studying the techniques of Leonardo and Botticelli, filling her sketchbook with careful observations and notes. It was in Florence that she began writing to Duke Alaric. "Your Grace," her first letter began formally, "I hope this finds you in good health. I write to inform you of my safe arrival in Florence, and to express my gratitude once again for this extraordinary opportunity." She described the galleries, the techniques she was learning, the way the Tuscan light seemed different from any she had known before. But as the weeks passed, her letters began to change. "Dear Alaric," she wrote from Rome, where ancient ruins rose like dreams from the earth. "Today I stood in the Colosseum and tried to imagine the roar of crowds from centuries past. I found myself sketching not just the architecture, but the shadows it cast, how they seemed to hold echoes of all the lives that had passed through those stones. She began adding small sketches to the margins, a detail from a fresco, the curve of a Roman arch, the play of light on ancient marble. What had started as duty correspondence was becoming something more intimate, a sharing of discoveries that felt as natural as breathing. Though she received no replies, she had not expected any from a man of his reserved nature. Mrs. Pemberton mentioned in passing that her letters were being delivered promptly to Blackwood Manor. "His Grace reads them immediately," the housekeeper had written in her own correspondence. "And I've noticed he's taken to walking the grounds more frequently, particularly near your cottage." The image of Duke Alaric reading her letters in the solitude of his library, perhaps pausing at her sketches, filled Alara with an unexpected warmth. She found herself writing not just about what she saw, but what she felt, what she wondered about, what made her laugh or moved her to tears. "I stood before the Pantheon today," she wrote from Rome, "and thought about permanence and impermanence. These stones have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, yet they endure. I wonder what gives a life meaning. Is it the grand gestures or the quiet kindnesses that echo through time? I find myself thinking of Blackwood more often than I expected." Vienna brought new challenges. At a gathering of expatriate artists, Alara found herself tongue-tied when asked about her background, unsure how to explain her unconventional marriage or her husband's extraordinary generosity without sounding either pitiable or boastful. The moment of social awkwardness left her feeling isolated among the very community she had dreamed of joining. That night, alone in her hotel room, she experienced her first real bout of homesickness. Not for her parents' house, but for the quiet dignity of Blackwood Manor, for Mrs. Hartwell's knowing smiles, for the cottage where she had first dared to believe in her dreams. When you're living your dreams, do you ever find yourself missing the unexpected places and people that helped make those dreams possible? Share your experiences below. "Dear Alaric," she wrote that evening, her usual careful penmanship replaced by something more urgent. "I had the strangest realization today. I've been so focused on seeing the world that I nearly forgot the importance of having someone to share it with. Not just anyone. Someone who understands why these experiences matter. Someone who sees value in the small discoveries as well as the grand revelations." She paused, her pen hovering over the paper, then continued with growing certainty. "I think what I'm trying to say is that freedom means nothing without connection. Adventure loses its savor without someone to tell about it afterward. I find myself composing these letters in my mind throughout the day, imagining your reactions to my discoveries. Is that strange? That in gaining the world, I've come to value more deeply the quiet man who made it possible." As she sealed the letter, Alara realized that her grand tour was teaching her more than artistic technique or cultural sophistication. It was showing her that dreams fulfilled in isolation were somehow incomplete. The experiences were magnificent, transformative even, but they gained deeper meaning when shared with someone who truly understood their significance. She was no longer the timid girl who had been sold by her parents, or the frightened bride who had walked down the aisle in despair. She was becoming someone new, confident, worldly, sure of her artistic vision. But she was also discovering that becoming herself meant understanding what truly mattered to her. And increasingly, what mattered was the thought of returning to Blackwood Manor, to the man who had seen her dreams before she had dared to voice them, and sharing with him everything she had learned about art, about the world, and about herself. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She had set out to see the world, but somewhere along the way, she had begun to understand what home truly meant. The carriage wheels on Blackwood's gravel drive sounded different to Alara's ears now, not the ominous crunch of approaching imprisonment, but the welcoming rhythm of homecoming. As the manor emerged from the autumn mist, she saw it with new eyes. Where once she had perceived only imposing grandeur and cold stone, she now recognized the elegant proportions, the way the ivy softened harsh angles, the promise of warmth within those ancient walls. She was not the same woman who had left 6 months ago. Her posture spoke of newfound confidence. Her eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen the world and found her place within it. The travelling dress she wore was cut in the latest Parisian fashion, but it was the way she carried herself that truly marked her transformation. Duke Alaric waited in the entrance hall, and Alara felt her breath catch as their eyes met. He seemed to be assessing her, taking in the changes that travel had wrought, and she found herself doing the same. Had he always held himself with such quiet dignity, or was she simply seeing him more clearly now? The grey eyes that had once seemed distant now appeared thoughtful, even warm. "Welcome home, Alara," he said, and the simple words carried a weight that made her heart flutter unexpectedly. "It's good to be back, Alaric," she replied, using his given name naturally for the first time in person. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure. Mrs. Hartwell bustled forward with barely contained excitement, eager to hear tales of foreign lands, but it was the Duke's continued presence that surprised Alara most. Rather than retreating to his library as she might have expected, he lingered, asking thoughtful questions about her travels, listening with genuine interest as she described the artistic techniques she had learned. "The light in Florence," she found herself explaining, "it's unlike anything I've ever seen. It makes even the most ordinary stone seem to glow from within. I kept thinking how beautiful it would look on the east wing of the manor, that same golden warmth reflecting off our own weathered stones." Duke Alaric tilted his head, considering. "Show me," he said simply. Over the following days, Alara found herself venturing beyond her beloved cottage studio with increasing frequency. The confidence gained from navigating foreign cities and engaging with artists from around the world had given her a new boldness. She began to see Blackwood not just as her refuge, but as a canvas with unlimited potential. Walking through the manor's grand rooms, she noticed details that had escaped her before. How the morning light fell across the drawing room, creating natural galleries for artwork. How the conservatory could be transformed into a space for both plants and creative gatherings. How the unused wing could be renovated to provide better housing for the estate workers. "I noticed in Vienna," she mentioned one evening over dinner, "that many of the great houses had established workshops for their tenants, places where they could learn trades that would benefit both themselves and the estate. The furniture makers there created pieces that were both beautiful and practical." Duke Alaric set down his wineglass, his attention fully focused on her words. "You're thinking of the old carriage house?" "Exactly. It has excellent light, and it's large enough to accommodate several workstations. We could bring in a master craftsman to teach the younger men, perhaps even some of the women who show aptitude for detailed work." To her surprise, rather than dismissing her suggestion as the fanciful notion of someone unfamiliar with estate management, Duke Alaric leaned forward with interest. The initial investment would be considerable, but the long-term benefits— He paused, calculating. "It would provide year-round employment, reduce our dependence on outside craftsmen, and give our people valuable skills." Their conversations began to extend well beyond the formal dinner hour. They would retire to the library, where maps and estate documents spread across the large oak table as they discussed improvements, innovations, and the welfare of their tenants. Alara discovered that Duke Alaric possessed not only a keen intellect, but also a genuine concern for those under his care, qualities that had been hidden beneath his reserved exterior. "You see things differently," he told her one evening, as they reviewed plans for expanding the estate's school. "Where I see problems to be managed, you see possibilities to be explored. And you see the practical steps needed to turn possibilities into reality," she replied. "I think we make a rather effective team." The word team hung in the air between them, acknowledging something that had been growing steadily. They were no longer simply Duchess and Duke, fulfilling separate roles, but partners working toward common goals. It was during one of these evening conversations that Alara finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her since her return. "Alaric," she began gently, "Mrs. Hartwell mentioned once that it had been too long since the manor had heard a woman's laughter. I've wondered about your first wife." The silence that followed was so complete that she could hear the fire crackling in the hearth, the soft tick of the mantel clock. For a moment, She feared she had overstepped, but then Duke Alaric's shoulders seemed to settle, as if he were laying down a burden he had carried too long. "Catherine," he said quietly. Her name was Catherine. We were very young when we married, a love match which was unusual for our circumstances. His voice carried a tenderness that made Alara's heart ache. She died in childbirth after 3 years of marriage. The child, our son, lived only a few hours. "I'm so sorry," Alara whispered, reaching across the space between their chairs to touch his hand gently. He didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers turned to clasp hers, and she felt the slight tremor in his touch. "I blamed myself for a long time. If I hadn't been so eager for an heir, if I had been more careful with her health, the guilt nearly destroyed me. I retreated from society, from life itself. I told myself it was grief, but truthfully, it was cowardice." "And yet you chose to marry again," Alara said softly. "That took tremendous courage." A rueful smile touched his lips. "Did it? I convinced myself it was merely practical, a marriage of convenience that would fulfill my duty without risking my heart again. But then I saw you, heard the passion in your voice when you spoke of your dreams, witnessed the light in your eyes when you described the places you longed to see. I realized that denying you those dreams would make me complicit in a different kind of death, the death of hope, of possibility." Have you ever found that sharing your deepest pain with someone actually brought you closer together rather than driving you apart? Sometimes vulnerability is the bridge to true connection. Alara felt tears prick her eyes. "You gave me my dreams because you understood what it meant to lose them." "Perhaps," he admitted, "but I never imagined that in giving you your freedom, you might choose to share it with me." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Alara realized that this was the moment she had been unconsciously preparing for throughout her travels, not just the discovery of the world beyond Blackwood's walls, but the recognition of what lay within them. "Before I met you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I felt worthless. My parents saw me as a burden to be disposed of. Society saw me as a failure because I couldn't fulfill a woman's supposed primary purpose. I had convinced myself that my dreams were selfish, that wanting more than duty and obligation made me somehow defective." "And now," he asked, his grey eyes searching her face, "now I know that dreams shared are dreams doubled, that freedom means nothing without someone who understands its value, that home isn't a place, it's the person who sees you truly and loves what they see." The words seemed to surprise them both with their honesty. Duke Alaric's hand tightened around hers, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Then perhaps," he said carefully, "we might consider this marriage something more than convenience." "A partnership," Alara agreed, her heart racing. "Built on respect, shared purpose, and," she paused, gathering courage, "growing affection." "Growing affection," he repeated, and the way he said it made it sound like a promise. Their first joint decision came the following week, when a dispute arose between two tenant families over water rights. Rather than handling it alone as he had always done, Duke Alaric asked for Alara's perspective. Together, they devised a solution that not only resolved the immediate conflict, but created a system for preventing future disputes. Standing beside him as they announced their decision to the gathered tenants, Alara felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what partnership looked like: two minds working in harmony, two hearts beating toward the same purpose. As they walked back to the manor afterward, Duke Alaric's hand brushed against hers, and this time neither of them pulled away. The touch was gentle, tentative, but it spoke of possibilities that neither had dared to imagine when they first stood together at the altar months ago. What does true partnership mean to you? Is it shared goals, mutual respect, or something deeper? We will love to hear your thoughts on what makes a relationship truly work. The marriage that had begun as a transaction was becoming something neither of them had expected. A love story written not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of understanding, shared dreams, and the gradual recognition that they had found in each other, not just a spouse, but a true companion for the journey ahead. Spring arrived at Blackwood Manor like a gentle awakening, and with it came a transformation that extended far beyond the budding gardens. The change was most evident in the quiet moments, the way Duke Alaric's eyes would seek Alara's across the breakfast table, the comfortable silence that had replaced their once stilted conversations, the natural way their hands found each other during their evening walks through the estate. Alara had discovered that love, when it grew slowly and was built on genuine understanding, possessed a depth that surprised her daily. There was the morning she found Alaric in her cottage studio, not intruding, but simply watching her work with an expression of such tender admiration that her brush had trembled in her hand. There was the evening he had surprised her by revealing his own hidden talent, a rich baritone voice that filled the music room as he sang old ballads while she sketched him by firelight. "You're staring," he had said that night, though his smile suggested he didn't mind in the least. "I'm memorizing," she had replied, her charcoal capturing the way shadows played across his features. "Artists are terrible that way. We hoard beautiful moments like misers hoard gold." The laughter that followed had been rich and unguarded. The sound Mrs. Hartwell had been waiting years to hear, echoing through the manor's halls once again. Alara had indeed embraced her role as Duchess, but not in the way she had once feared. Rather than losing herself in duty and obligation, she had found ways to weave her passions into her responsibilities. The estate's unused east wing had been transformed into workshops where local artisans could perfect their crafts. She had established a small school where the children of tenants could learn not just reading and arithmetic, but also drawing and music, skills that might open doors beyond the boundaries of rural life. Have you ever found that your greatest fears about a situation turned out to be completely unfounded? How did reality surprise you? Tell us in the comments section. The true test of their transformed relationship came with the announcement of the Blackwood Manor Spring Charity Gala, the first major social event the estate had hosted in over a decade. Alara had suggested it as a way to raise funds for the new tenant workshops, but she knew it would also serve as society's first real glimpse of the Duke's mysterious new Duchess. "Are you certain you're ready for this?" Alaric asked as they reviewed the guest list one final time. Some of these people can be unforgiving in their judgments. Alara looked up from the seating arrangements she had been carefully crafting, her eyes sparkling with a confidence that would have been unimaginable a year ago. "Let them judge," she said with a smile. "I know who I am now, and more importantly, I know who we are together." The night of the gala, Blackwood Manor blazed with light and life. Carriages lined the drive, and the sound of music and laughter drifted from the ballroom windows. Alara, resplendent in a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented her eyes, moved through the crowds with natural grace, discussing art with visiting patrons, charming elderly dowagers with stories of her travels, and quietly ensuring that every guest felt welcomed and valued. But it was the way she and Alaric moved together that truly captured attention. There was an ease between them, a natural harmony that spoke of genuine partnership. When Lord Pemberton, a pompous neighbour who had long criticised the Duke's reclusiveness, made a snide comment about convenient marriages, Alara's response was swift and elegant. "How fortunate," she said with a serene smile, "that convenience and affection need not be mutually exclusive. Some of us are blessed to find both in the same person." Her gaze found Alaric across the room, and the warmth in her eyes was unmistakable. "Though I suspect true convenience lies in marrying someone who sees your dreams as clearly as you do." Lord Pemberton had no response to that, and several nearby guests nodded approvingly. Alaric, who had been watching the exchange, approached with 2 glasses of champagne and an expression of undisguised pride. "Defending my honour again?" he murmured as he handed her a glass. "Defending our happiness," she corrected, and the way he looked at her then made several ladies fan themselves more vigorously. The evening's highlight came when Alara unveiled her latest project, a series of paintings depicting life on the estate throughout the seasons. The work showed not grand, romanticized visions, but honest, beautiful glimpses of daily life. Children playing in the village square, craftsmen at work in their shops, the changing light on the manor's ancient stones. It was art that celebrated the ordinary and found beauty in the real. "These are extraordinary," breathed Lady Ashford, one of London's most influential art patrons. "You've captured something I've never seen before, the soul of a place, not just its appearance." "That's because she doesn't just observe," Alaric said, moving to stand beside his wife. "She participates. She belongs." The simple statement carried such conviction that several guests exchanged knowing glances. Whatever doubts society might have harbored about this unusual marriage were being thoroughly dispelled. As the last guests departed and the manor settled into peaceful quiet, Alara and Alaric found themselves in the conservatory, surrounded by moonlight and the gentle fragrance of night-blooming jasmine. Alara had kicked off her silk slippers and was curled in a chair, her elaborate coiffure slightly mussed, looking more beautiful than ever in her relaxed contentment. "Do you ever wonder," she mused, "what would have happened if you hadn't given me that key?" Alaric considered the question seriously. "I think," he said finally, "that we both would have lived perfectly acceptable lives, dutiful, respectable, and utterly incomplete." "And now?" "Now," he said, reaching for her hand, "I wake each morning curious about what you'll discover, what you'll create, what you'll teach me about seeing the world through fresh eyes. I never expected that marriage could be an adventure." Alara smiled, intertwining their fingers. "Speaking of adventures, I've been thinking about our next project." "Oh, an art school? Not just for the estate children, but for anyone with talent and passion, regardless of their circumstances. We could bring in masters from the continent, offer scholarships, create something that could change lives." Alaric's eyes lit with the enthusiasm she had come to love. "It would be expensive, but worthwhile, challenging to organize, but rewarding to achieve. It would require years of dedication." "Good thing we have years ahead of us." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Have I mentioned lately that I love the way your mind works?" "Show me," she whispered, and when he kissed her properly, it tasted of champagne and promises, and the sweet certainty of a future they would write together. Later, as they made their way upstairs, Alara paused at the portrait gallery, where a new painting now hung. Her own work, depicting the two of them in the garden, not posed formally, but caught in a moment of genuine laughter. It was a portrait of partnership, of two people who had found in each other not just love, but purpose. "Do you think," she asked softly, "that we're building something that will last?" Alaric followed her gaze to the painting, then to the other portraits lining the walls, generations of Blackwoods who had lived and loved and left their mark on this place. "I think," he said, "that we're building something better than a legacy. We're building a love story that's still being written, a partnership that grows stronger with each chapter. And whether or not we have children to carry on our name, we're creating something that will outlive us both. A place where dreams are nurtured, where love is celebrated, where two people proved that the most beautiful stories are the ones that begin with what if and end with why not." As they climbed the stairs together, Alara reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Her dreams hadn't vanished when she married the Duke. They had evolved, expanded, and found their perfect complement in his steady wisdom and generous heart. She had discovered that true freedom wasn't about escaping from life, but about finding the right person to embrace life alongside. Their story was far from over. There would be more travels, more projects, more quiet evenings by the fire, and grand adventures beyond Blackwood's walls. There would be challenges to face and dreams to pursue, art to create and lives to touch. But tonight, as moonlight streamed through the manor's ancient windows and two hearts beat in perfect synchrony, Alara knew with absolute certainty that she had found something rarer than any fairy tale ending. A love that was real, earned, and still being written with each passing day. The Duke had given her a key to a cottage, but she had discovered it was really a key to a life beyond her wildest imagination. A life where dreams and duty danced together in perfect harmony, where love grew from understanding, and where every ending was really just a new beginning waiting to unfold. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.